Welcome back. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe to Retail Horror Stories. Hit the like button and drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep showing you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. Rachel had worked plenty of late nights at Dollar Tree, but there was something different about this one. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder than usual, echoing off the empty aisles stacked with plastic toys, cheap canned food, and seasonal trinkets. It was just after 10 p.m., and she had locked the front doors herself. She always double-checked, giving the handles an extra tug to make sure they were secure. Tonight, she'd checked them 3 times. The metal clanked into place with finality, and she told herself she was safe. All she had to do was finish the till, sweep the aisles, and clock out. An hour, maybe less. She'd done it hundreds of times before, but 20 minutes into her closing routine, as she was counting the register, the familiar ding of the entry bell broke the silence. Rachel froze, her eyes flicking to the doors. They hadn't moved. The glass panes reflected the faint glow of the parking lot lights. Her old sedan still parked in the same spot. The lock was still engaged. Yet the bell had rung, sharp and clear, as though someone had just stepped inside. She told herself it was a glitch. The equipment was old. Sensors malfunctioned all the time. With a shaky breath, she returned to the bills in her hand, stacking them with more force than necessary to mask the unease prickling at her neck. Then it chimed again. Her head snapped up, heartbeat spiking. The sound wasn't just random static, it was deliberate, the same bright tone that had greeted hundreds of customers before. But this time, there were no footsteps, no friendly chatter, no one walking the aisles. She leaned forward, squinting at the doors. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was her own reflection, distorted in the glass. But this shape was taller, impossibly tall, and it wasn't mimicking her movements. Its edges blurred like heat waves rising from asphalt, and yet its face, if it had one, was nothing but a smear of shadow. Rachel's throat tightened. She blinked, and it was gone. The glass reflected only her, pale and trembling behind the counter. "Get a grip," she whispered to herself. "You're tired, that's all." But when she turned back to the register, the bell chimed again. This time, not from the front doors. It came from the middle of the store. Her stomach dropped. That wasn't possible. The bell was wired to the doors, and only the doors. She reached under the counter for the flashlight every closer kept nearby. Its beam was weak, sputtering, but it was better than nothing. Her voice wavered as she called out, "Hello? Store's closed. If anyone's in here, you need to leave." No answer, only the buzz of the lights. She stepped into the central aisle, shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The beam swept across shelves of candy, coloring books, plastic flowers. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary. Her pulse hammered as she moved deeper into the store. The air grew heavy, like she was walking underwater. She passed the seasonal aisle and froze. A shopping cart stood in the center of the floor, parked sideways as though someone had abandoned it mid-stride. She hadn't left it there, and the sight of it, the loneliness of it, made her skin crawl. Her flashlight beam wobbled as she raised it higher. The cart was filled, brimming with identical items. Small silver handbells from the holiday section, dozens of them, all glinting under the fluorescent light. One of them jingled. Rachel stumbled back, the sound slicing through the silence like a blade. The cart stayed still, but another bell rang, then another. Soon, the entire cart erupted into a deafening chorus of chimes, as though invisible hands were shaking every bell at once. Her scream caught in her throat. She turned and bolted, sprinting back toward the register. The bells followed, the sound swelling louder, echoing across the aisles. She didn't dare look back. Reaching the counter, she grabbed her keys, fumbling them with trembling hands. Her body screamed to get out, to escape, to run until the bells were nothing but a memory. She shoved the lock open, slammed her shoulder into the door, and burst into the parking lot. Cold night air hit her face. Relief flooded her chest, until she looked around. The lot was empty, completely empty. Her sedan was gone. The other cars that had been there earlier, gone. Even the street lamps had vanished, swallowed by darkness. The pavement stretched outward into an endless black void. No road, no buildings, no sound. Just her, standing on an island of cracked asphalt under the faint glow of the Dollar Tree sign. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She turned back toward the store. The windows reflected the neon sign, but behind the glass, the aisles were shifting. Shelves rearranged themselves like a puzzle being taken apart and put back together. Then the bells began again. Not distant, not faint, but loud, everywhere at once. Rachel staggered backward. The front doors, still wide open, slammed shut with a metallic clang. She dropped her keys and pounded against the glass, screaming for help. Her fists left no marks. Inside, the lights flickered, plunging the store into a strobe of black and white, and in each flicker, the figure from the reflection stood closer. First in the back aisle, then near the freezers, then right behind the shopping cart of bells. Every time the light blinked back on, it had moved closer. Rachel's throat tore with another scream. The bells rang louder, their clamor filling her head until it was the only sound left in the world. She pressed her forehead to the glass, sobbing. When the lights went out one final time, the bells stopped. The silence was worse. And when the lights blinked back on, Dollar Tree was empty again. No cart, no bells, no figure, only Rachel's reflection in the glass. Except she wasn't crying anymore. The woman, staring back at her, was smiling. The back room of Dollar Tree always smelled faintly of cardboard and cleaning chemicals, the kind of scent that seeped into your clothes no matter how long your shift was. For Melissa, the scent had become routine. She'd been working at the store for nearly a year, and the ritual of cutting open shipments, breaking down boxes, and stacking shelves was second nature. But tonight, something about the back room felt wrong. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering every few seconds. Piles of fresh deliveries waited for her. Brown cardboard boxes stacked high, some leaning precariously as though they might tumble at the slightest nudge. Melissa grabbed her box cutter, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and pulled one of the smaller boxes toward her. It was plain. No Dollar Tree logo, no shipping label, no stickers. Just brown cardboard sealed tight with thick packing tape. Weird, she thought. Every shipment usually had barcodes or at least an address tag. She sliced the tape open with a swift drag of the blade and folded back the flaps. Inside was another box, smaller, perfectly fitted inside the first, like a Russian nesting doll. Melissa let out a frustrated groan. Really? They're packing boxes inside boxes now? She yanked the smaller one out. Same deal. Plain, unmarked, sealed. She cut it open. Another box, this one was the size of a shoebox. She opened it and found a box even smaller, snug inside. Her annoyance shifted into unease. It was too deliberate, too neat. She checked the others on the pallet. All the regular shipments had the Dollar Tree logo, price tags, inventory sheets. But this one stack, 5 boxes tall, wasn't marked at all, just plain cardboard. Melissa's hands trembled slightly as she cut open the third box. The blade slipped on the tape, catching her finger. A thin line of blood welled up, and she cursed under her breath. She stuck her finger in her mouth, sucking away the sting, before yanking the flaps open. Inside, another box, and this one wasn't sealed. Her stomach tightened as she pulled it out. It was lighter than she expected, empty except for a single folded receipt at the bottom. Melissa set it on the floor and slowly unfolded the slip of paper. The ink was faded, but she could still make out the print. Dollar Tree, transaction number 0000001. Cashier, Melissa R. Date, her hiring date. Item, 1 box, $1. Melissa's mouth went dry. That date, she remembered it clearly. It was the day she'd first walked into the store, nervous in her new uniform. She dropped the receipt like it had burned her and backed away. Her eyes darted to the other unopened boxes. They seemed to loom taller, heavier, as though they were waiting. Her radio crackled. "Melissa, how's the stockroom coming?" It was her manager's voice, casual, unaware. She pressed the talk button, her voice shaky. Something's weird back here." But before she could finish, the radio cut out with a harsh burst of static. The lights overhead flickered violently, buzzing louder, until the back room was plunged into near darkness. Melissa fumbled for her flashlight, her breath coming in quick, shallow bursts. She swung the beam across the boxes. Every single one was open now. She hadn't touched them, hadn't cut the tape, but the flaps were all peeled back. Dozens of boxes lined up in neat rows, each one holding another box inside, smaller and smaller, leading like a breadcrumb trail toward the back wall. Her flashlight beam shook as she followed the path. The boxes grew tiny, some no bigger than a jewelry case. Finally, she reached the last one. It was no larger than a matchbox. Plain, unmarked, sitting in the center of the floor as though waiting just for her. Melissa crouched, her knees weak, and lifted it carefully. It was weightless. With trembling fingers, she opened it. Inside was a slip of paper no bigger than a postage stamp. She brought it closer to her light, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Scrawled in faint black ink were 3 words: "You are next." The air in the back room shifted, growing colder. She turned, clutching the tiny box in her hand, only to find the stacks of cardboard had rearranged themselves. They towered in impossible formations now, walls of brown rising higher than the ceiling should allow. The path behind her was gone. Melissa's breath came in short gasps as she stumbled backward. Her radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't her manager's voice. It was a whisper. "Open the next one." She dropped the flashlight. It rolled across the concrete, beam spinning wildly, catching glimpses of shapes moving in the shadows. Hands, too many hands, reaching from the boxes, pulling themselves free. The last thing Melissa saw before the light winked out was one of the plain brown boxes sliding across the floor toward her, its flaps opening like a mouth. And then the back room went silent. The next morning, when employees arrived for their shift, they found the back room immaculate. The shipment was stacked neatly, every box sealed. Melissa's box cutter lay on the floor, blade stained with a thin line of red. When her manager called her phone, it rang twice before going to voicemail, but no one ever saw Melissa again. Dollar Tree rarely bothered with displays. Most seasonal products were dumped into wire bins or hung on pegs. But one October, corporate sent each store a mannequin for the Halloween aisle. A hollow plastic torso, stiff arms, a smooth, blank face. The manager at Melissa's store draped it in a black cloak and set an orange pumpkin bucket in its hand. It stood at the end of the aisle, a silent sentry among fake cobwebs and discount candy. Melissa never liked it. Not because it looked real, it didn't, but because it looked aware. Every night she swore its head was turned a fraction more toward her. Customers noticed too. "That thing creeps me out," one woman whispered. A teenager poked it and swore it flinched. Employees laughed, but late at night, the laughter died in Melissa's throat. She was closing alone on a Tuesday when it happened. She locked the doors at 10:05, tugged the handles twice. Her dented sedan sat in the lot under humming street lamps. Inside, fluorescents buzzed overhead, freezers droned, and the aisles were quiet except for her broom scraping the floor. Seasonal was last on her list. Glitter from cheap decorations sparkled underfoot. The mannequin waited at the end of the aisle, cloak fluttering slightly in the AC. She kept her eyes on the floor, sweeping steadily. When she glanced up, the broom clattered against the tile. Its head was turned, not by much, but enough, an angle that said, "I see you." She walked over, heart racing. Zip ties still secured its ankles, arms stiff, hollow, harmless. She touched the cloak, just plastic. Her radio crackled. "You good, Mel?" the manager asked. "Fine," she said, forcing calm, just finishing up. She bent to sweep again. When she looked up, the head had tilted farther, chin almost on its shoulder. The bucket swayed once and settled. Her mouth went dry. She backed away, dropped the broom, and hurried to the front counter. Numbers steadied her. Count the till, lock up, leave. 20s, 10s, 5s. Coins clicking into their slots. Her pulse slowed. The bell over the front doors chimed. Her head snapped up. The doors were closed, the lock bar horizontal. 4 cars still outside. No one entering, no one leaving. Yet the cheerful chime echoed through the empty store. She looked toward Seasonal. The mannequin was gone. The flashlight under the counter trembled in her hands as she swept its beam across the aisles. Plastic pumpkins, discount masks, no mannequin. Then came the sound of plastic scraping against tile. She swung the light toward aisle 3. There it was. At the far end, half in shadow, the mannequin stood with its head tilted impossibly far, chin nearly to its chest. The orange bucket in its hand began to swing, back and forth, back and forth. The beam shook. Each stutter of light showed it closer. Far end, halfway, end cap, 3 feet. Then, inches away, blank face staring without eyes. She turned and ran. The backroom door resisted before giving way. She slammed it shut, turned the lock, and pressed her back against the wood. The air smelled of cardboard and lemon cleaner, scents that usually meant safety. She wiped sweat from her face and tried to slow her breathing. Silence pooled around her. Then a soft sound, plastic tapping against the door. She looked down. The orange pumpkin bucket slid slowly under the gap, scraping across the concrete until it stopped at her feet. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. Inside were slips of paper, receipts. She picked one up. Dollar Tree, transaction number 000003. Cashier, Melissa R. Item, 1 body, $1. The paper quivered between her fingers. Another receipt, same line item, same cashier. The door groaned. Something pressed from the other side. Slow, steady, testing the hinges. Metal bowed, then sprang back. A pale, plastic hand reached through the gap. Fingers bent backward to fit, joints creaking like a doll forced past its limits. Melissa kicked. The hand withdrew, then returned, persistent. Another hand joined it. Then the rounded edge of a blank face squeezed through, forehead scraping the floor. She scrambled for her phone. The screen froze mid-dial, turned black, then reflected her own face under a greenish cast. For a heartbeat, the reflection smiled at her. She dropped it. Bolts screamed. Cheap screws backed out of tired wood. The gap widened. The bucket tipped, spilling paper snow. Her radio crackled. Not her manager, but a voice pitched low and thin like tape played wrong. "Melissa," it whispered, "we're ready at the register." The lights flickered violently. When they steadied, pallets had stacked themselves into a corridor aimed neatly at the door. Beyond it came the steady bell tone of the front door, chiming over and over until it blurred into one continuous ring. She shoved at the emergency exit. The red bar didn't move. Someone had zip-tied the hinge. Her laugh came out high and sharp. When she turned back, the stockroom door stood ajar. No hands now. Just the corridor of boxes pointing toward the opening. She stepped forward, scattering receipts behind her like a paper tail. The threshold opened into the sales floor. The Halloween aisle glowed with light that wasn't fluorescent anymore. All the mannequins from the seasonal end caps, more than she remembered, stood shoulder to shoulder, cloaks still, buckets empty. They faced the register like parishioners at silent prayer. The bell chimed one last time and cut out. Melissa edged around them, careful not to touch. At the register, the printer chewed paper. The screen already bore her name. Cashier, Melissa R. Item, 1 body, $1. She yanked the plug. The screen stayed on. Receipts curled across the floor. The mannequins turned their heads in unison. Buckets swayed. Melissa bolted for the doors, keys shaking in her fist. She threw the lock and shoved the glass open. The parking lot was gone. In its place stretched gray nothingness, endless floor without walls. Far away, or very close, stood a line of mannequins, receding into forever, all cloaked, all facing her. Behind her, the store doors clicked shut. The next morning, the manager found the store spotless. Seasonal was perfectly faced. At the register, a mannequin stood with its bucket brimming with fresh receipts. On top was the last sale of the night. Cashier, Melissa R. Item, 1 body, $1. Tendered, exact. Dollar Tree wasn't just a place for party supplies, off-brand snacks, and holiday decorations. By the registers sat a small glass case of scratch-off lottery tickets, a little extra revenue stream the company rarely mentioned, but customers never ignored. Some came in just for those tickets, buying them with loose change or crumpled bills, scratching them immediately on the counter in a desperate ritual. Melissa had seen plenty of hopefuls over the years. Young moms clutching quarters, truckers in faded baseball caps, retirees with trembling hands. Most smiled when they lost, muttering, maybe next time, before slipping out. But there was one customer who stood out. He was older, maybe late 70s, with a gray coat he wore no matter the weather. Every week, like clockwork, he bought the same ticket. A cheap green $1 scratcher printed with clovers. He never bought anything else, just the ticket. He'd scratch it on the spot with a quarter from his pocket, glance down at the results, and leave without a word. It became routine. Melissa rang him up every Tuesday around 9, counted his change, and listened to the quiet scrape of his coin. He never smiled, never frowned. Just scratched, checked, left. But one night the ritual broke. The store was empty, the aisles were faced, glitter and confetti swept neatly into piles, and Melissa was almost finished counting the till when the old man came in. The bell over the door chimed, startling her. She glanced at the clock, 9:57. Closing in 3 minutes. $1, he said, voice dry as paper. She rang him up and handed him his green clover ticket. He placed it flat on the counter, pulled out his quarter, and scratched. Slowly, methodically. Melissa expected the usual: numbers, dollar amounts, maybe a small prize. But after a few strokes, his hand froze. The coin slipped from his fingers, clattering against the counter. His face had gone white. "Not again," he whispered. Melissa leaned forward. At first, she thought the ticket was blank, misprinted. But no, every square he had scratched revealed the same word in block letters. Leave. Not a prize amount, not a symbol. Just the command, repeated again and again. Her stomach tightened. "Is this a misprint?" she asked softly. The old man didn't answer. He pushed the ticket toward her with trembling fingers, then turned and shuffled quickly toward the exit. His steps were uneven but purposeful, like someone trying to outrun a memory. "Sir?" she called. "Do you want—" The bell chimed as the doors closed behind him. He was gone. Melissa looked down at the ticket. Her breath caught. Every single box spelled it out. Leave, leave, leave. The lights overhead flickered, buzzing louder. A draft slid across her arms. The doors were shut, but it felt like someone had left a window open to the winter night. Her radio hissed. She grabbed it. "Steve? You there?" Her manager sometimes checked in even after he'd left. Static. Then, faint and low, a voice she didn't recognize. "Leave." Melissa dropped the radio. The ticket slipped from her hand, fluttering to the floor. When it landed, it wasn't alone. A dozen more were scattered across the tile, as if they had fallen from the ceiling. Each one unscratched, silver coating unbroken, but through the faint sheen she could already see the letters pressing from beneath. Leave. She backed against the counter, knocking the cash drawer open. Coins spilled across the floor, clinking in chaotic circles. Some spun and spun, refusing to fall flat, ringing like little bells in the silence. The fluorescents overhead buzzed louder, flickering, shadows stretching long across the aisles. Melissa forced herself to look toward the glass doors. Someone was standing outside. For a moment, she thought it was the old man, but his outline was wrong. Too tall, arms hanging past his knees, head tilted at a sickening angle. His face was blurred, like an overexposed photograph, the details erased. Her knees buckled. The figure pressed something flat against the glass. A lottery ticket. The word "leave" glowed faintly through the fogged pane. Melissa bolted for the back room, slamming the door shut and twisting the lock. Darkness swallowed her. The lights in the back had gone out. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her flashlight. The beam sputtered, then steadied. She swung it across the pallets and stopped cold. Every box was open, and inside each one weren't supplies or stock. Neat stacks of lottery tickets filled them to the brim. Thousands of them, perfectly aligned. Each ticket already revealed the same word across every square. L-E-A-V-E. Melissa's throat tightened. She stepped backward, but her heel caught on loose paper. The tickets slid from the boxes in waves, fluttering to the floor, piling around her ankles. The sound was deafening. Thousands of paper slips whispering against each other like dry leaves in wind. She tried to move, but the pile shifted with her, pulling her deeper, paper clinging to her legs. She clawed at the shelves, dragging herself forward, but more tickets poured down, covering her shoes, her knees, her waist. "Help!" she screamed. Her fists pounded against the backroom door. The tickets answered, "Leave, leave, leave." She turned, searching desperately for escape, and her flashlight beam landed on the mirror above the employee sink. Her heart stopped. In the reflection, she wasn't in the back room. She was at the front register, calmly scratching a ticket with the old man's quarter. Behind her, mannequins lined the aisles, standing like customers, their blank faces all tilted toward her. Melissa staggered back. The flashlight slipped from her hand, beam spinning wildly across the room before settling upward. On the ceiling, thick black words were scrawled across the tiles in jagged handwriting. "You should have left." The ticket surged higher, climbing her arms, pressing against her mouth. She fought to breathe, fought to move, but they clung tighter, dragging her down into the paper sea. Her last glimpse before the beam winked out was the mirror. Her reflection smiled at her as the mannequin stepped forward. When the morning crew arrived, everything was in order. The registers balanced, the aisles faced, the floor spotless. On the counter sat a single lottery ticket. Every square was revealed. Every space spelled the same word, L-E-A-V-E. And beneath it, in fresh ink that hadn't been there before, a name no one recognized. Cashier, Melissa R. The helium tank sat near the party aisle, surrounded by racks of shiny foil balloons, hearts, stars, birthdays, anniversaries. Kids tugged their parents toward it all the time, begging for one more floating prize. At night, though, when the store was empty, the balloons seemed less festive. They drifted against the ceiling tiles, their strings swaying gently, whispering across each other with faint scraping sounds. Melissa was used to it. She'd been closing at Dollar Tree for almost a year, and the party section always gave her the creeps. The aisle smelled faintly of latex and dust, and in the silence the balloons seemed to breathe. It was near closing on a Wednesday when it started. She was restocking cheap wrapping paper when she heard it. A shrill, piercing scream that cut through the store and froze her in place. Her first thought was a child. A kid had gotten separated from their parent. But there were no customers left. The store had been empty for nearly an hour. "Hello?" Melissa called, voice echoing too loudly. No answer. Then it came again. A scream, higher this time, desperate and ragged. The sound wasn't coming from the doors or the back room. It was coming from the party aisle. Melissa gripped the roll of wrapping paper like a weapon and edged toward the sound. Her footsteps echoed against the tile. At the end of the aisle, a single balloon floated lower than the others. A blue foil "Happy Birthday" with faded lettering. Its string brushed the floor like it was too heavy to float. Melissa took a step closer. The balloon twitched, turning slightly as if pulled by a breeze. And then it screamed. The sound blasted from inside the foil, muffled yet unmistakable. The shriek of a human throat, piercing and agonized. Melissa staggered back, heart hammering. No, that's not possible. The balloon bobbed toward her, slow and deliberate, its string dragging behind. Its surface crinkled as if something inside was pressing against it. Another balloon tugged free from the cluster near the tank. This one was pink with hearts. It drifted into the aisle, then opened with a jagged tear down the middle. Instead of helium, a low groan spilled out, like someone gasping their last breath. Melissa ran. Her shoes squeaked as she tore back toward the register. The store seemed larger now, aisles stretching endlessly. Behind her, the balloons weren't floating anymore. They dragged themselves along the floor, strings coiling like pale threads, foil crinkling as they filled with sound. Some screamed, some cried, some whispered words she couldn't quite hear. She reached the register, panting, and grabbed the phone. The line was dead. No dial tone, just silence. A balloon bumped against her shoulder. She spun, slapping it away. The surface bulged where she'd touched it, distorting outward, forming the impression of a face. A mouth opened, wide and jagged, and screamed directly into her ear. Melissa screamed back, shoving it aside. It burst with a pop. But instead of helium, the aisle filled with a deafening chorus of voices, men, women, children, all crying out at once. The sound rattled the light fixtures, shook the shelves, sent cheap toys spilling to the floor. Balloons tore loose from the ceiling, dozens of them, rushing like a tidal wave. Their surfaces twisted as they filled, faces pressing outward. Faces she didn't know, mouths open in eternal screams. Melissa bolted for the back room, slamming the door behind her. She pressed her weight against it as balloons thudded against the other side, strings sliding beneath the crack like groping fingers. The back room smelled of cardboard and bleach. Safe. Familiar. But the safety didn't last. A faint hiss rose from the corner. She turned her flashlight toward the helium tank. The valve had twisted open on its own. The hiss grew louder, filling the room, until the walls seemed to vibrate. Then came the sound inside the hiss, voices, hundreds of them, overlapping and frantic. "Help us! Let us out, please!" Melissa clamped her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside her skull now, pressing against her temples. 1,000 desperate throats screaming for release. The first balloon rolled into view. Not floating, rolling. Deflated, crumpled, dragging itself across the floor like a slug. It inflated slowly, swelling, its surface stretching thin until a pair of eyes pressed outward. They blinked. Melissa kicked it, sending it skidding across the concrete, but more rolled from the shadows. Dozens. Their foil skins bulged with shapes of faces, some distorted, some almost lifelike. Their mouths opened in unison. The room filled with a scream so loud it dropped her to her knees. She crawled toward the emergency exit, nails scraping the floor. The red bar gleamed ahead. She shoved against it, locked, no give. The balloons pressed closer. Strings wrapped around her wrists, her neck, pulling her back. The foil faces loomed above her, mouths yawning wide, shrieks cutting through her skull until her vision blurred. "Stop!" she screamed. "Please, stop!" They didn't. The last thing she felt was her feet leaving the ground as the balloons lifted her, dozens of them straining, pulling her upward into the buzzing lights. The next morning, the employees found the party aisle spotless. The tank was shut tight. The balloons floated calmly against the ceiling, strings tied neatly to their weights. But one balloon was different. A faded blue happy birthday drifted lower than the rest. Its surface was warped, bulging slightly, and if you stood close enough, you could swear you heard it screaming. Closing shifts at Dollar Tree were usually uneventful. Sweep the aisles, count the till, straighten the shelves, and go home. But every so often, employees whispered about the lock-in, nights when the store didn't feel empty even after the last customer left. Janet had never believed the stories. She worked the late shift to pay bills, not chase ghost tales. But one Friday night she came dangerously close to believing. She was the last to leave, as usual. She pulled the steel bar across the front doors at 10:05, double-checking both locks. The parking lot was quiet, lit by one flickering street lamp. Her reflection in the glass looked exhausted. Red polo rumpled, hair tied back, dark circles under her eyes. The aisles were straightened, the floors mopped. All she had left was the register. She opened the drawer, started stacking bills into neat piles. That was when she heard it. Footsteps, soft, careful, coming from the back of the store. Her head snapped up. "Hello, we're closed." Silence. She held her breath, listening. The freezers hummed, the lights buzzed. Then the footsteps came again, closer this time, deliberate against the tile. "Hey!" Janet shouted, forcing authority into her voice. "If someone's in here, you need to leave right now." "We're closed." No answer. Her palms went clammy. She grabbed the heavy flashlight under the counter and clicked it on, the beam cutting across the empty aisles. Candy, cleaning supplies, seasonal decorations. Nothing. She stepped out from behind the register, flashlight sweeping left to right. Her shoes squeaked on the floor as she made her way down the central aisle. "Hello?" The word echoed. Halfway down the store, she stopped. At the far end of an aisle, just past the hair products, a shadow ducked out of sight. Her heart lurched. She tightened her grip on the flashlight. "I saw you," she said. "You can't be back here." The shadow didn't reappear. She advanced slowly, beam fixed on the aisle. The shelves on either side loomed taller than usual, the rows of shampoo bottles and combs suddenly claustrophobic. She reached the end cap, stepped around. Empty. The aisle stretched ahead, deserted. Her chest rose and fell too fast. She turned to head back toward the register but stopped dead. The store lights had dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as if the power had lowered by half. Her radio crackled at her waist. She grabbed it quickly, relief flooding her. "This is Janet. I think someone's in the store. Can anyone hear me?" Static hissed back. Then, faintly, "You're not alone." She dropped the radio. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, the noise echoing unnaturally loud in the darkened store. Something laughed behind her. Not loud, not manic. Just a soft, mocking chuckle. Janet swung the flashlight. Empty aisles, silent shelves. She turned and ran for the doors. Her keys shook in her hands as she fumbled with the lock. She shoved the key into the slot, twisted hard. Nothing. The lock wouldn't turn. She tried again, harder, rattling the handle until her knuckles went white. The door didn't budge. Her reflection in the glass shifted. For a heartbeat, it wasn't her face staring back. It was another woman, older, with hollow eyes and a mouth stretched too wide. Janet staggered back, gasping. Behind her, the footsteps returned, slow, steady, moving closer. She bolted toward the back room, shoving the door closed and throwing the latch. The air inside was warmer, heavy with cardboard and dust. She leaned against the wall, sucking in quick breaths. Silence again. She pressed her forehead to the cool plaster, whispering, "It's fine. It's fine. It's just me. Just nerves." Then she heard it. A knock. 3 slow raps against the backroom door. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Go away," she whispered. The knocking grew louder, harder, then stopped. Janet raised the flashlight, beam trembling. She swept it across the back room. Boxes stacked high, pallets of paper towels, crates of plastic bins. All normal. She lowered the light and nearly dropped it. In the far corner stood a shopping cart. It hadn't been there before, and inside the cart, stacked neatly, were dozens of red polo shirts, the exact uniform she was wearing. Her stomach dropped. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a pallet. The shirts shifted. One by one, they collapsed inward, as though something underneath them was moving. Janet turned and sprinted for the emergency exit. She slammed into the bar, shoving with all her weight. The door rattled but didn't open. A whisper pressed against her ear, though no one was behind her. "Stay with us." Janet whirled, swinging the flashlight wildly. The beam caught the cart again. The shirts were gone. In their place sat a folded name tag. She stepped closer, unwilling but unable to stop herself. The tag was face up. It read, "Janet L., Cashier." Her breath hitched. She was already wearing her name tag. The radio at her feet crackled again. A voice, flat and cold, said, "Register 1 is now open." Every light in the store blazed back on at once. The backroom door swung open, and beyond it, the sales floor gleamed unnaturally bright. Janet's flashlight flickered out. She stumbled through the doorway, shielding her eyes. The store looked the same, but it wasn't. The aisles stretched too long, the shelves too tall. The air hummed with something alive. And halfway down the center aisle, she saw them. People. Not customers, not co-workers. Dozens of figures stood perfectly still, dressed in red polos, each one wearing a name tag. Their faces were blurred, features indistinct, like smudges on a painting. Every head turned toward her in unison. The intercom crackled overhead. A voice she didn't know said, "Attention shoppers, please remain inside. Doors will reopen at dawn." Janet screamed and ran for the front doors, but the glass reflected only her, dozens of her, stretching into infinity. The figures began to move, their footsteps echoing hers. By the time the sun rose, the store was quiet again. The morning crew unlocked the doors and found everything in place. Shelves neat, registers balanced. But Janet was gone, and at the front counter, hanging neatly on a hook, was a single name tag. Janet L., Cashier. The freezer section of Dollar Tree was always cold, even in summer. Customers liked to joke about it, rubbing their arms while they grabbed pizzas or popsicles. For employees, though, the freezers weren't funny. The glass doors frosted over constantly, and sometimes they fogged so thick you couldn't see inside. Melissa had worked there long enough to know the quirks. door handles that stuck, shelves that rattled, fans that roared so loudly you had to shout to hear each other. But there was one thing she couldn't explain: the handprints. She noticed them one Thursday night while straightening boxes of frozen burritos. A single print pressed against the inside of the glass. Clear as day. 5 fingers, palm flat, like someone had pushed from within. She frowned, wiping at it with her rag. The print smeared but didn't vanish. She scraped harder until her knuckles hurt, but the outline remained faintly visible. "Cheap cleaning supplies," she muttered. She let it go. The next night the handprint was there again. Different door, different angle, as if it had moved. Melissa tried not to think about it. Stores were weird, glass fogged, condensation left shapes. But deep down, something about the prints gnawed at her. They were always the size of an adult hand, always pressed from the inside. One night she decided to test it. After closing, she lingered by the freezers, flashlight in hand. The store was silent except for the hum of compressors. She crouched, watching the glass fog slowly over. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then faintly, she saw it. A shape pressing outward, fingers spreading, palm flattening, imprinting into the condensation. Her breath hitched. She raised the flashlight. The beam lit rows of frozen food, boxes stacked neatly, frost glittering. No one inside, but the handprint remained, solid and sharp against the glass. Melissa stepped back. Her reflection stared at her, pale and wide-eyed, lined up perfectly with the print, as though the hand belonged to her reflection, not her. She turned the flashlight off and walked quickly toward the register. She told herself she imagined it, just a trick of condensation, nothing more. But the next night there were 3 prints. One small, like a child's, one large, pressed hard enough to fog the glass around it, and one that dragged downward, leaving streaks like nails scratching. Melissa's stomach turned. She backed away, nearly tripping over a display of chips. Something shifted behind the glass. She froze, staring. A shadow moved between the shelves of frozen vegetables. Not clearly, not human, just a smudge of darkness that shouldn't have been there. She told herself to leave it alone, just walk away. But her feet carried her closer, breath fogging the glass. She cupped her hands around her eyes and peered inside. At first, all she saw were boxes, then slowly, a face formed in the frost, not hers. The features were blurred, lips pressed against the glass as if whispering through it. The eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed directly on her. Melissa screamed and stumbled backward. The freezer door rattled violently, shaking against its hinges. The boxes inside tumbled to the floor in a muffled crash. The noise stopped as suddenly as it began. The glass was empty, clear, no handprints, no face. Melissa fled to the back room, slamming the door and locking it. Her flashlight shook in her hands, beam cutting wild arcs across the shelves. She pressed her back to the wall, trying to steady her breathing. The hum of the freezers followed her. Louder now, vibrating through the walls, rattling the boxes. Then came the knocking. 3 sharp raps against the backroom freezer door. She froze. Slowly, she turned the flashlight toward the sound. The metal door bulged inward, faintly, like someone was pushing from the other side. Frost began to creep along its surface, spreading in jagged lines. Her breath puffed white in the beam. The handle rattled. "No," Melissa whispered. The door slammed once, hard enough to shake the walls. Then again. She stumbled backward, tripping over a pallet. The flashlight clattered to the floor. She crawled for it, heart hammering. But when she raised the beam, the freezer door stood wide open. Cold poured into the room, stinging her skin. The inside wasn't a freezer anymore. It was a hallway, long, narrow, walls coated in frost, stretching into blackness. The air roared like 1,000 fans spinning at once. Melissa's legs shook as she stood. Every instinct screamed to run, but her feet stepped forward anyway. She crossed the threshold. The door slammed shut behind her. The hallway swallowed her whole. Her flashlight beam cut across ice-coated walls. Handprints smeared every surface, dozens of them, overlapping and frantic. Some small as a child's, some enormous. Palms pressed so deep the ice cracked around them. She moved forward, each breath burning her throat. The sound of fans grew louder. Her light flickered. Then she saw them. Bodies. Frozen behind the walls of ice, like insects trapped in amber. Their faces were pale, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide, begging. Some she didn't recognize. Others looked familiar, co-workers, maybe even customers she'd seen once or twice. Her knees buckled. She staggered, dropping the flashlight. It rolled, beam spinning across the walls. The frozen faces all turned toward her at once. Melissa scrambled for the flashlight, her breath ragged. She picked it up, swung it wildly. The faces didn't move again, but the handprints on the walls began to shift, pressing outward, multiplying, filling every inch of the corridor. The hallway ended at another door. Frost rhymed its handle. She lunged for it, grabbing, yanking, praying it would open. It did. She stumbled out, gasping. Warm air hit her face. She was back in the store. The aisles looked normal. The freezers hummed quietly. Customers' reflections stared from the glass. Except the store was closed. No one should have been there. She turned slowly. Every freezer door now bore handprints. Dozens. Hundreds. Pressed from the inside, palms flat, fingers spread. She backed away, tears blurring her vision. The nearest door fogged, and letters scrawled themselves across the condensation. "Let us out." Melissa dropped the flashlight and bolted for the front doors. She rattled the lock, slammed her fists, screamed until her throat tore. The glass reflected only her pale, terrified face, and behind her, a crowd of shadows pressed against the freezer doors, watching. When the morning crew arrived, the freezers were spotless. No prints, no fog. Shelves neatly stocked. But the frozen pizzas were gone. The burritos, the popsicles, every box of food, every bag of vegetables, every frozen item had vanished. And on the inside of one door, faint but unmistakable, a single handprint remained. Smaller than the rest, pressed at the level of a child. The receipt printer at Dollar Tree was old, one of those blocky gray machines that rattled whenever it spit out paper. Most nights it worked fine, but sometimes when the roll jammed, it would chew up the receipt and shred it into curls, forcing the cashier to slam the lid and refeed the paper. Melissa hated it. The sound grated on her nerves, a reminder of how cheaply everything in the store was made. It was just after closing on a rainy Thursday when the printer began acting strange. The last customer had left, the doors were locked, and Melissa was balancing the till. The register screen glowed softly in the dim store, the only light besides the buzzing fluorescents above. The drawer clicked open and she counted bills, her mind half asleep. That's when she heard it, the soft whir of the printer. Her brow furrowed. She hadn't rung up anything. She reached for the machine, lifting the lid to stop the roll, but it was already spitting out paper. 1 line, 2 lines, 10. She tore the sheet free. The receipt was blank. She sighed, thinking maybe the ink ribbon had slipped. She was about to toss it when faint letters bled across the paper, like ink seeping up from underneath. 1 body, $1. Melissa froze. The paper continued feeding. She yanked it free again, but another slip printed immediately. 1 body, $1. Her chest tightened. She unplugged the printer. The hum stopped. The store was silent again. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. Glitch, just a glitch. She went back to counting. The printer whirred. Her head snapped up. The machine wasn't plugged in. The cord lay limp on the counter. Yet the roll was feeding, paper sliding smoothly into a growing pile. She grabbed the new sheet. Cashier, Melissa R., 1 body, $1. The paper kept going. She tore it. Another began. She tore that one. The machine didn't slow. Her hands shook as she backed away. The receipts spilled over the counter, fluttering to the floor like a snowfall of thin paper. The intercom crackled overhead, a sharp burst of static. Then a flat voice announced, "Transaction approved." Melissa stumbled back, heart hammering. "No," she whispered. The printer screeched, rattling violently, feeding faster. Receipts poured out in a torrent, covering the counter, piling onto the floor. The words repeated over and over. 1 body, $1. 1 body, $1. 1 body, $1. She tried to run, but the paper caught her ankles. Slippery, endless sheets dragged under her feet, tangling her steps. She clawed her way free and bolted down the central aisle. The store wasn't silent anymore. The printers at every register had come alive. She could hear them whirring in unison, a chorus of rattling paper, receipts spewing onto the floor in every direction. The sound was deafening, mechanical, like hundreds of teeth grinding. She skidded around the corner and froze. The floor was covered. Piles of receipts stretched down the aisle, knee-high, rustling like leaves in wind. They weren't blank. Every single one bore her name. Cashier, Melissa R. Item, 1 body, $1. Her stomach heaved. She shoved through the drifts, paper crunching under her shoes, heading for the back room. But the aisles were wrong. They stretched longer than they should, shelves looming higher, shadows twisting into shapes she didn't recognize. The paper shifted under her feet like waves, pulling her off balance. A printer screamed behind her, louder than the rest. She turned and saw one of the registers at the far end of the aisle. It was glowing, screen lit, though the store's power was off. The drawer slid open and shut on its own, clacking in a rhythm like a heartbeat. The printer attached to it fed steadily, paper crawling across the floor. Melissa squinted. Words crawled up the receipt. Transaction complete. Change due, 0.00. Balance paid. The intercom clicked again. Thank you for your purchase. Her scream tore from her throat as she turned and plowed through the avalanche of a paper, heading for the front doors. Her keys rattled in her pocket. She pulled them out, jamming them into the lock, twisting hard. Nothing. The key wouldn't turn. She shoved, slammed, kicked. The glass rattled, but the doors didn't budge. Her reflection stared back at her. Only it wasn't just hers. Behind her reflection stood dozens of faint shapes, blurred figures crowding closer, their faces unreadable. Receipts pressed against the inside of the glass, as if someone was taping them there from the other side. Her own name stared back at her from every sheet. Melissa dropped the keys and ran for the back room. She slammed the door and locked it, chest heaving. Silence returned, but only for a moment. The printer in the back office clicked on. Her flashlight beam landed on it. The machine sat in the corner, screen black, yet it hummed as it fed paper. Melissa approached slowly, terrified but unable to stop herself. She pulled one sheet free. The words were different this time. Cashier logged out. Closing balance, 0.00. Her hands trembled. Another sheet fed. Employee removed from register. Her breath caught. She ripped it free, but the next one already printed. Final shift complete. The intercom clicked. You may now exit. She turned to the door, fumbling with the latch. Her hands were slick with sweat, keys slipping. Finally, the door opened. But the hallway beyond wasn't the back room. It was an endless corridor of registers, stretching into blackness. Each one hummed softly, printers feeding receipts onto the floor. The air reeked of ink and hot paper. Melissa staggered forward. The floor crunched under her shoes, receipts layered so thick it was like walking on snow. Her flashlight beam caught names printed on the paper. Not just hers. Dozens of names. Hundreds. Employees she'd worked with. Customers she remembered. People she'd never seen before. Every receipt read the same. Item, 1 body, $1. The printers clicked in unison. She spun, desperate to run back through the door, but it had vanished. Only more registers. The intercom crackled one last time. Transaction complete. No refunds. The printers roared, feeding faster, drowning her in paper. It rose to her knees, her waist, her chest. She tried to climb, to push free, but the paper pulled her down, wrapping her limbs, smothering her screams. The last thing she saw before the receipts swallowed her was a glowing register screen. Balance. Paid in full. When the morning crew unlocked the store, everything was in order. The floors were spotless. The registers were balanced. The receipt rolls were full. But the printer at Register 1 had left something behind. A single slip of paper curled neatly in the tray. Cashier. Melissa R. Item, 1 body, $1. Tendered, exact,